Hey everyone, I've heard a bit of wrong information going around that dragon spells do not benefit from Radagon's icon or other means of casting speed increase. And in this video, I wanted to show you guys how exactly they benefit, how strongly they benefit, and how I went about measuring this frame data. Additionally, I go on a much needed tangent about how casting speed scaling works overall in this game, as there's so far no video explaining it in the detail that it deserves. Let's start with my methods for measuring the attack startup for these spells. What I did at first for most of these spells was stand still in front of an enemy that hasn't noticed me yet, cue the spell, let it get one hit on the enemy, then return to grace. Then, I would go back and look at the footage in a video editor and identify the first frame of animation on this attack. It's definitely something that isn't easy immediately, but I'll try and show you here how I identified the first frame of animation on this one. Do note that this method is of course not perfect, as the game could drop a frame and start, let's say, 32 milliseconds into the animation instead of 16. On top of this, due to the game's animation blending system, the first true frame of the animation may be too subtle for you to even tell apart from your idle animation. Additionally, regarding DS Animation Studio, which you might have seen me use in some previous videos, it's still yet to get an upgrade for ER, and I don't have an ETA on when or even if it will be done, as Elden Ring, of course, has a new version of Havoc, its physics engine. The creator of it should take their time, however, I did quickly ask them about what frame rate the player animation data events are written for, and like DS3, it's 30 FPS, which gets scaled up to whatever frame rate you're using in the actual game, just like DS3. This means, in a test, if we get an odd amount of 60 FPS frames, like 117, it's likely actually 59 frames in the actual frame data, due to higher frame rates allowing the animation to simply start sooner. But let's get on to finding the first frame of this Dragonfire spell. If we go frame by frame in this footage, we'll notice a frame where the left leg and left arm slightly moves left up, while the right leg and right arm goes right up. We know that this frame is the right one because the movement is sudden, and is moving in the direction the actual animation does. See how it looks 29 frames later. Now do you see it? Oh, and that's the actual spell emblem, but we're looking for the start of the actual hit from this attack. So let's go further until we see a hit. There we go, that's the first frame of the attack, as the breath spawned directly inside the enemy. So if we measure the frames between the first frame of animation and the first hit of the animation, we can calculate the attack startup of the spell for our specific casting speed. For your own tests, make sure that your timeline frame rate is equal to your recording frame rate. I recommend you record in the maximum frame rate of your game. If you're between 30 and 60, try lowering your settings for the test. For this particular attack startup in our own recording currently in the timeline, the timestamp of the animation beginning is 13 seconds, 52 frames, while the first hit is at timestamp 15 seconds and 59 frames. Subtract the first from the last, getting 2 seconds and 7 frames. Convert the remaining seconds into 60 FPS frames, and you get a total of 127 frames for the startup of the attack. That's just over 2.1 seconds of startup. Great, now that we got this done, let's see how this looks at full casting speed. But before we do that, I need to quickly clear some things up. These first recordings, the one with the clean rot knight, are before the patch 1.03. I tested the dragon spells post patch with the same dex amount, and the casting speed was only 1 frame off, so within the margin of error of a single frame. This leads me to believe that the dragon spells did not change in speed since the patch. However, what did change was basically every single spell now has the FP consumption event trigger when the actual projectile or attack of its spell comes out. This makes our life easier, as the same frame the projectile can hit is the first frame the FP consumption visually appears. There are likely outliers to this rule, but all the Dragon Breath spells follow this rule where the FP consumption matches the first frame the attack can hit. Let's talk about increasing casting speed. To use max casting speed, we need 70 virtual dex. Dexterity is the primary way casting speed is scaled, And the few casting speed increasing methods in the game simply add virtual dexterity that only applies for casting speed. The talisman, Radagon's Icon, raises your virtual dexterity by 30, while Azur's Glintstone Staff raises it by 40, as long as you have it in one of your hands. Yep, even though it says specifically sorceries, it applies to any spell casting tool equipped. Alternatively, you could level dexterity to level 70, however, that's quite a bit of an investment on a mage build. But if you are leveling dexterity and using spells, keep the cap of 70 virtual dex in mind. No, not the stat mind. But how much does each amount of virtual dex speed up the animations? Well, it depends. On some spells, literally none. The running, rolling, and jumping casts of fast spells like Swift Glintstone Shard, Carrion Slicer, Bestial Sling, and Catch Flame all do not benefit from casting speed. Only the standing casts do. It also does not even speed up any of the animations. What's actually happening is, there are two animations. One is the startup, and one is the actual casting of your spell. The startup animation has an event of varying frame length that starts partway through it, and stops at the end of the animation. The event is a early cancel window. When activated, it will cancel the animation early proportional to your virtual dex amount. If you have 0 virtual dex, it will cancel on the very last frame of the event, giving you the slowest casting speed possible. If you have 35 virtual dex, it should cancel halfway through the event. If you have 70 virtual dex, it will cancel the first frame the event is activated. The animations that don't scale with casting speed simply do not have these windows as they are special, while the ones that do have windows of varying lengths. For example, the window on Dragon Breath is likely a lot longer than the window on Swift Glintstone Shard. Oh, wait a minute, you're cheating. This is Dark Souls 3 frame data, not Elden Ring's. You're right. The problem is the editor doesn't support Elden Ring frame data yet. However, everything I said here 100% applies to Elden Ring. Don't believe me? Let's look at an example. Dragonfire, at varying casting speed, starts with his quick JoJo pose before suddenly transitioning into another animation with this dragon head and casting crest. When comparing casts of different virtual decks, you can clearly see that they are animating on the same exact speed. One of them simply cancels earlier in the animation. Another more explicit example is when I was testing some damage with a friend who was in the middle of uploading a YouTube video. This tanked his connection and made some interesting things happen when casting Bestial Sling. Notice how he suddenly freezes within the first part of the Bestial Sling, only for a whole moment later for it to finally fire. This is simply because his connection dropped and failed to network his animation update, leaving him stuck at the very end of the casting animation on my game. Pretty funny, is it? You can get the same exact effect in DS3 by simply not allowing the follow-up animation to fire by modding it, resulting in you simply being stuck like this. Now that we have all that sorted, with our newfound knowledge on casting speed increases, let's measure the Dragonfire at max virtual dexterity. Simply equip the Radagon icon and Azur's Glintstone Staff, cast Dragonfire, save your recording, and examine it in the editor. With the place I put in the timeline, the animation starts at 33 seconds and 24 frames, while the breath launches at 35 seconds and 12 frames. This totals to a casting speed of 108 frames, or a 1.8 second startup. So, using full casting speed with Dragonfire and other standard ground dragon breath spells like Rotten Breath allows them to get their first breath off 17.6% faster, or in 316 milliseconds shorter. Might not seem like a lot, but it could be the difference between an opponent being cooked or you being stunned out of your attack. Let's look at some of the other Dragon Breath spells, shall we? Aegil's Flame, or other Dragon Breath spells that are described to emit breath from above, are more popular than ground equivalents due to having more range, damage, and tracking, on top of being unable to be backstabbed. What? Okay. So I guess it has at least a bit more range? Yeah. Superior incantation of Dragon Communion, my ass. Okay, well, it's still technically better on tracking and damage, like for real, as it does about 30% more damage on a Gil's Flame than Dragonfire per hit. And it has about 180 degrees of tracking per second during each breath. While Dragonfire is limited to about like a 160 degree arc that you first started breathing in, but after each breath you can start breathing in a different direction as well. However, how does their casting speed compare? Like I stated before, time is everything with these spells, as they have a long startup with no protective hyper armor, allowing your opponent to either get out of range if they are already far away from you, or even worse, could severely punish you before you could get it off. So despite the other advantages, the ground variants could potentially be more viable if they are significantly faster, but let's see if that's the case. For determining the first frame the breath can hit, we can use the FP consumption method, as even before this patch, breath from above spells consumed FP on the first frame the breath spawned. For determining the first frame of animation, I actually came up with another method that's pretty good for this spell. Basically, when the animation begins, the first frame has an event that overrides my left hand's armament location, putting it away to its sheathed location. This is completely instant, so it's a much easier way of determining the first frame. However, I believe that the frame drops can still mess this calculation up slightly. According to this method, the first frame of animation occurs in the timeline at 9 minutes, 21 seconds, and 34 frames, while the frame the breath spawns on is in 9 minutes, 23 seconds, and 50 frames. Doing the math with some second to frame conversion, we get a cast speed of 136 frames, or about 2.26 seconds rounded down. Now let's calculate the startup for max casting speed. The starting frame of the animation is at 10 minutes, 34 seconds, and 49 frames. The first frame of the breath of the animation is at 10 minutes, 36 seconds, and 46 frames in. So with Azur's Glintstone Staff and Radagon's Icon, which reaches the max casting speed cap, the attack startup of Dragon Breath from above spells is 117 frames. That's only 1.95 seconds of startup. Not as good as the max for Ground Breath, but it's only 150 milliseconds off. At certain virtual dexterity thresholds versus your opponent's amount, your above Dragon Breath may start even faster than their Ground Dragon Breath. So anyways, I hope you all learned something. Okay, fuck this spell. You literally just go into a JoJo pose for like a few milliseconds, then boom! Instant 600 damage. Yes, I know, after that you can easily severely punish them, as they'll be stuck in the animation, but they can simply use it as solely a finisher or a way to win trades, as if they do trade, they may be stunned out of it anyway. It's just dumb. It's just like a dice roll to who dies below a certain HP threshold. If an optimal player used it, they'd be much more harder to read on when exactly they intend to use it, and they could nearly guarantee you die most of the time, even if you're playing optimally. Remember, they could always hard swap a seal on when you didn't know they had access to one. So against an optimal user, it would be more like you have to roll a 6 in order to win against it if you ever reach low enough HP. I do wonder though, with practice, could you recognize the tells of that particular animation and reaction roll it when it comes out of nowhere? Well, with low casting speed, me and a friend tested it and it was quite difficult, even when he was expecting it to come out and when I was not threatening him with any other attacks. And while he was not in a true battle where he would have to focus on that as well.
That was definitely a reaction.
It was much easier with Quick Step or Bloodhound Step, due to the dodge activating on press and not release like rolls do, but he could sometimes do so with ordinary rolls as well. But if it wasn't bad enough, at max casting speed, the shockwave hits more than 2 times faster than it does at 13 dex, specifically in 350 less milliseconds, so the max casting speed allows you to hit in 18 frames, which is 300 milliseconds. That is above human reaction time, but take into account the things I have previously mentioned and animation blending, and it's super unrealistic you'll roll this in a real fight on reaction. More likely, you might get it on prediction if you make a read on nearly the exact moment your opponent is going to cast it. Ah, yeah, I picked it out. Anyways, I think I rambled enough on that spell. Other than the shockwave, it just gets cool points from me. Thanks for watching, I hope you learned something from this. Please subscribe and hit that bell if you want to see more in-depth Elden Ring content like this. And join the Elden Ring PvP Discord in the description if you're looking for people to do casual or competitive PvP with. I'd love to see you there. Goodbye, all.